happy Moon Festival for you. I mean, it's yesterday, but I want to say
Oh,
that.
thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Yes, I think we can probably still, I haven't got any moon cakes, but I must see if I can get some.
Yeah.
We have a Chinatown in London and they sell moon cakes.
Mhm.
So that would be a great idea. Actually, thank you
Oh,
for that. Yes. And happy Moon Festival for you and for your family.
it's like the Thanksgiving, people get together under full moon to celebrate the
Mm,
families and harvest and stuff like that. Yeah. So
mm,
it's a very important festival in China.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Oh,
then why
absolutely. Yes.
yeah, why don't you tell me, what you talked to I'm very curious about what you and Professor Sachs talked about.
Well, right. We talked about the general international situation. We talked about the BRICS. You'll see the program that's coming out probably tomorrow between
Okay.
myself. It's Glenn Deason was also involved. But before we did the program, I had a brief discussion with him about the discussion that he had with Professor Mearsheimer,
Hmm.
which has appeared. I forget the name of the YouTube channel, but you know which one it is.
Yeah.
And Professor Mearsheimer spoke about how China is the peer competitor and rival of the United States. And in a world where there is chaos and instability and all of the rest, the United States must be tough and ruthless and basically put China in its place
Mhm.
and keep the Chinese down, because that's the only way that the US can ensure its own security, which because otherwise, inevitably and inexorably, China will threaten it. And I completely disagree with that view. I think this is wholly wrong. I've said
Mhm.
this many times. I think that Professor Mearsheimer, who is one of the greatest scholars on international relations in the West, is deriving his ideas very much from the European system, where indeed you did have various states in constant rivalry and war with each other, and
Mhm.
where war was an absolute structural element and interstate competition was an absolute structural element of European society, culminating, of course, eventually in the two world wars. I don't think this is true of the global
Mhm.
situation, and I absolutely do not think this is true of how China conducts its foreign relations, has ever conducted its foreign relations. I
Mhm.
think it is based on a misreading of Chinese history, which has always generally sought peace with its neighbors. When China has indeed expanded its territory, its territorial control, it has been in the direction of inner Asia, Central Asia, as we would call it today. And that has almost invariably been in a defensive way. It is to
Mhm.
protect China from the Central Asian nomadic peoples, the people that I never know how to pronounce their names, the Juchen and the Xiongnu. The
The
Chinese
Shinu,
obviously know how to pronounce these words,
uh-huh.
and all of these people, the Mongols, of course, all of those. And China has needed sometimes to extend its control into these regions in order to prevent these people from pressing against China. China has never shown any desire or intent to expand into the Pacific, even though it's had various opportunities to, or at least what the West would call opportunities to. It had massive naval dominance in the Pacific in the 15th century when it had the treasure fleets, and it made no attempt to do that then. It had very good trading and diplomatic relations with the nations of Eastern Asia, which the West completely misunderstands. It refers to something called the tributary system, which never existed. It was a system of mutual trade and mutual understanding and mutual diplomacy that worked extremely well for many, many centuries. That the whole structure of Chinese society is based on concepts of stability and harmony. Harmony is a big is
Mhm.
a big word in China, which is not, I
Yeah.
think, properly understood in the West at all. But last but not least, and a point I specifically made to Jeffrey Sachs, that if the United States were to do that which Professor Mearsheimer was talking
Right.
about in that program, which is to take on China in the East Asian region, on the first and second and all that island chains and all
Island
of
chain,
that,
yeah.
it would lose.
Yeah.
It will lose. I mean, anybody who knows anything about the geopolitical realities of that region, the relative balance of economic and military power, and by the way, the culture and history of the societies that are there. And I should tell you, I've been to South Korea, I've been to Malaysia. I am, by the way, traveling to Malaysia next week. I will be in Malaysia over the course of next week. If you go to these places, you will see how profound the interconnections with China are, and the fact that the people in these places, and that includes, by the way, South Korea, do not want to get into a long-term adversarial relationship with China. If the United States gets drawn in, tries to draw these societies into a long-term adversarial relationship with China, with the possible exception of Japan, it will meet resistance
Yeah.
over time there. So all of the facts say that eventually in the United States gets involved in a long-term confrontation in this region with China, it will lose.
Mm.
So this confrontation is neither necessary, because I completely agree with Professor Sachs. China poses no threat to the United States and has never posed any threat to the United States at any period in its history, and certainly doesn't do so today. And
Mhm.
secondly, doing what Professor Mearsheimer proposes
Mhm.
would be construed by the Chinese as a threat to themselves. They would inevitably then take counter action, which would mean that the United States would lose. And if you
Mhm.
want proof of that, look at the two East Asian wars that the United States has fought, which are wars, in effect, well, the Chinese were on the other side. One was Korea
Yeah.
and one was Vietnam.
Mhm.
China in the 1950s, when the Korean War was fought, was not the China of today.
Mhm.
Far less powerful, much
Mhm.
poorer country, and yet it fought the United States to a standstill in Korea. And
Mhm.
about Vietnam, we all know what the outcome there was. So, I mean, this is completely wrong. As I said, it's based on a misapplication of European history to the completely different world of East Asia. And it does not take into account the actual relative balance between China and the United States. So that's it.
I think, yeah, but I have to say, he actually represents a group of people. It's not just him. They are people who are, seems like have their mind very clear about what's going on in Ukraine is not a winnable war. They want to see it end, but they don't seem to have problem containing. They use the word containing China.
Mhm.
He represents a group of people, even like the panels, like David Sachs, I think it's like that. I read his
Yeah.
article, he's like that. And then the other two panelists, I don't know who they are. In the United States, I find that they tend to invite like a rich people. I just assume they're rich and fancy
Mm,
people
mm.
because they're rich, then they must, know everything. So, but I think that they all have that kind of view. Jeffrey Sachs probably is the only one on the panel that you would agree, I think.
Well, they're all the press applauding Professor Mearsheimer, and when Sachs spoke, he was listened to in bewildered silence. I completely agree. There is something about China that seems to um, warp the minds of some people in the United States. That's all I can say. I get to say it. I mean, I get to be. I should say I know David. I know David Sachs. I like him very much. I think that on Ukraine he's entirely sensible and very sane, and on many other topics as well. On China, as you rightly say, like Professor Mears, I also know and like. I think all of these people have a blind spot, a dangerous one. But and with apologies to these
Mhm.
people, I think fundamentally, deep down, the core thing is that they can't get their heads around the fact that a non-European society, an
Yeah. Yeah.
East Asian society, has surpassed in many respects the mighty, invincible United States, which all Americans believe somehow represents the peak of European and therefore, by definition, human civilization. And I think this is really ultimately the problem, because anybody who has any knowledge of China, any knowledge of Chinese history, any knowledge of the true sentiments of the Chinese people will know that what they're fighting is ghosts. They have no substance. They have invented a China of their minds, which has no real connection to the China that actually exists.
Yeah, and if you want to learn, the China mentality, just look at the wall, the Great Wall, right?
Yeah,
The China built the wall to protect itself,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
If you're aggressive, you would be just keep on going out and exploring and occupying and colonizing. You wouldn't be put so much effort onto building such a great wall, right? That I think that by itself should tell you something about the mentality there. Um,
Absolutely. This is completely correct. A society, a Chinese society that has the resources to build a structure like the Great Wall
well, yeah.
at the time, at the time when the Great Wall was built, well, of course, it was built at various times, but it was
Yeah,
what we mainly see today is built
yeah.
during the Ming
Ming
Dynasty,
Dynasty.
and that was, let's talk about that time, the 16th
Yeah,
century. A society that has those kind of resources has the resources to conduct massive expansion
yeah,
and aggression everywhere in the world. And China chose not to do that. In
yeah.
fact, if you read the discussions and debates that took place, and we have those, the records about the discussions in the 16th century during the Ming dynasty, we have it, because Chinese records are incredible. We could see that the idea of launching some
Yeah,
great, war of conquest never occurred to
yeah,
anybody. It was never even discussed. The
no.
thought never even existed. So that's why they went. I mean, they were having these problems with the Mongols. It was mainly about
Mhm,
the Mongols at that time.
yeah,
There was a big battle in the middle in the later part of the 15th century when the Mongols managed to capture the emperor, who was a fool and
mhm,
left the capital and tried to
yeah,
lead an army against the Mongols and all of that. And they had lots of problems afterwards. And they made a decision, look, how are we going to protect ourselves? We are going to build the Great Wall. And that's what
well,
they did. And
mhm,
that reflects the aspirations, the feeling of Chinese society. Chinese society is very, very pacific. The Chinese will fight and defend themselves and defend their interests. But as I repeatedly said so many times in these programs, if you look at their art, which is the strongest reflection of a society, you notice how committed to harmony and peace and balance China Chinese society is. You see this in their architecture, in their gardens.
mhm.
You see it in their paintings, which, as I
Paintings,
said,
yeah.
I
Mhm,
are my particular love. Never see any depictions of war in them and conquest and
yeah.
that kind of thing. You never see it.
Yeah. If there's any comfort, if you, I don't know if you read that under that YouTube, there were lots of comments. Actually, I would say overwhelmingly people like Jeffrey Sachs. So
Yeah,
the audience outside that
yeah,
that
the
forum,
bubble.
whatever that is, yeah.
Yeah, that
So
bubble
I
of
think,
people. Yeah.
yeah, I think most people still like peace. They like
Yes.
Jeffrey Sachs' idea of make
Yes.
peace with China.
Yeah.
I think majority, even Americans, I think probably British too, don't see China as a threat.
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
don't think regular people,
Well, I,
yeah.
I don't know about America so well, but about Britain, I can say that unequivocally. It's a very striking fact, by the way, just to say, and this is something that people in China might find interesting. Whenever people in Britain go on and on about immigrants, and they always do, by the way. I mean, this is constantly talked about. It's very, very striking, but they never ever discuss, talk about, or are angry about Chinese immigrants. China is popular with the British people. the British people, what they know about China, they very much like. It may be their own interpretations of Chinese food, which may not be very similar to what you eat in China, but whatever it is about China, to the extent that the British have any conception or knowledge of China, they like it. They certainly don't have any interest in a war with it.
Yeah, the overseas Chinese are like that too. They kind of like keep for
Mm,
themselves and doing their business, doing their things, and
mm,
not very aggressive people in
no, no,
general.
no.
Yeah. And I would say sometimes to the Chinese detriment is that we don't even that interested in politics.
No.
Most Chinese in particular, it's grown up in mainland and then you immigrate to another country. All we want, and our parents, like when I left China, my parents are telling me, be a good student and do your, work hard and those kind of things. They don't intend to even interfere with the politics,
Mm,
to tangle themselves into politics, even though it's in fact important. If you want to have some
yeah,
voices and representations,
mm,
you actually do need to, stand up and to be a politician. But it's just like, okay, let them do their thing, let me do my thing. It's a very
yes.
kind of like not not that harmful people, so
Well,
yeah,
as you discover when you go there. By the way, again, can I just say you can read 18th century accounts of visitors, Western visitors to China at that time, the 18th century. And I mean, specifically English ones, the Macartney mission, for example, which we've talked about, touched on
yeah,
in other programs, but other earlier visits to China as well. And one of the things that impressed Westerners about China at that time is how peaceful and law abiding and orderly it was. It certainly compared with the Europe of that time. And I think that partly reflects what you've just said. Most Chinese people are hardworking, they
yeah,
have very strong traditions of hard work, of honesty, but you could say that it comes from what the West calls Confucianism, if you like. I don't know whether that's true or not.
yeah,
But
yeah,
anyway, it's all there. And I think it continues to this day.
yeah. I, but I guess we just have to. I mean, I just wish that people like Mearsheimer, David Sachs, even Tucker Carlson, I think I want them to go visit China. Go spend
Mm,
some time there.
yeah,
And um, anyway,
there
it's
we
a
go.
very yeah. All right.